our third panel is the impact of clean energy, improved quality of life for all Ohioans. And we're going to bring up Chris Allwein with Allwein and Moser, LLC, Rick Hicks of the Columbus Public Health, Brandon Kern from the Ohio Farm Bureau Federation, and Christina O'Keefe, the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. Thank you all very much.
Good evening, and thank you all for being here. My name is Christina O'Keefe, and I'm the Director of Energy and Air Quality for the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, also known as MORPC. We're a voluntary association of 60 local governments in the 15-county region within central Ohio, and we provide programs and planning and technical services in the area of transportation, sustainability, housing, and energy, with a focus on promoting the region's growth and vitality. And as a regional planning organization, you could probably guess, we typically have a lens to take a long-term view. So what are our actions today, and how does that impact what we see in the future of tomorrow? A key initiative that we launched last year called Insight 2050 is a collaboration between MORPC, Columbus 2020, and ULI Columbus. And really this is preparing our local community leaders for the growth in the future. A key fact from Insight 2050 identified that the Central Ohio region will grow by 25% by 2050. That's an additional 500,000 people and 300,000 jobs. And if you put that in perspective with the rest of Ohio, with our growth in Central Ohio by 25%, the rest of Ohio is anticipated to see a 3% decline. So when we think in terms of energy, how are we going to fuel this growth? Not only for the people that we're adding, the jobs that we're adding, but to also fuel our economy. At MORPC, we view energy as part of our regional infrastructure that supports the economic growth. And we also released last year a report called the Regional Energy Action Plan that really identified that we're slightly behind when it comes to the energy use compared to the rest of Ohio and the U.S. It identified that Central Ohio uses more energy on a per capita basis than the rest of Ohio and a typical American. So you can think about that in several terms. One is sustainability. What's the impact of that wasted energy on the air we breathe, the water we drink, and our public health? But also in terms of the economy. Who's paying for that wasted energy? Consumers and businesses. So in a region that's growing by 25% by 2050, we think about what challenges our local community leaders are going to face. As we add people and jobs, what will be the additional demands on the infrastructure and utilities when we think about the capacity and costs? What will make up that energy supply over the next few decades to serve this growth? What will be the cost of new generation, not only to replace the aging fleet that we have today, but again to serve that growth in the future? And what will be the impacts of that fuel mix on our air, water, and health? So MORPC works with our member governments to understand and control their energy costs, not only for the residents and businesses that live in their communities, but within their own facilities. And many local leaders are taking the action to integrate energy efficiency and renewable energy in their community planning efforts. We're seeing it as a driver for economic development, to strengthen emergency preparedness, and to improve the quality of life. And also to deliver savings back to taxpayers with lower operating costs within government facilities. And I'm really heartened because when we talk about who's going to lead, where is that position of who's going to lead, I'm seeing it with our local leaders. Our Central Ohio community leaders are understanding that the smarter use of energy is linked to the productivity in their communities. And I'll leave it at that.
Thanks. Good evening, everybody. I'm Brandon Kern, Director of State Policy for the Ohio Farm Bureau. Farm Bureau is Ohio's largest general farm organization. We represent the agriculture industry and farms of all sizes, types, and shapes. In my role as State Policy Director, I represent our organization in front of the General Assembly here and then serve as a consultant to our members in their grassroots policy development process that they go through throughout the year. I think if you think about agriculture and the impact on quality of life for agriculture, you have to think about agriculture as both an energy producer and an energy consumer. And so if you think about agriculture as an energy producer and the impact of quality of life in terms of the use of renewables and energy efficiency, the obvious place you're going to start is our ability to use what we grow to produce energy. And biofuels and biodiesel are the most obvious place to start. Between 2001 and 2012, corn production in the U.S. increased by over 13%, and the amount of corn that was used for ethanol production increased from 1.6 billion bushels in 2007 to 4.5 billion bushels in 2012. And in similar numbers for the use of soybeans and the creation of soybean oil that was used for biodiesel. In 2007, 2.9 billion pounds of soybean oil was used for production of biodiesel, and that increased to over 4 billion pounds by 2012. And so incredible economic opportunity for farmers and agriculture to use the commodities that we grow to actually produce clean energy in the U.S. I think one of the really interesting opportunities that we have in Ohio is going to be related to anaerobic digesters in Ohio. If you've read in the papers lately, and the reason why I think that it's really interesting is the connection that it has to another issue that agriculture is working to tackle right now in Ohio, and I see State Senator Cliff Height in the back of the room, who's also working to tackle this issue, and that's how does agriculture play a role in protecting our water resources in Ohio? And anaerobic digesters, as we have moved through different policy proposals and how agriculture can be a part of protecting Ohio water resources, one of the ways that we need to do that is reducing the amount of phosphorus runoff from our fields that get into our waterways. And if you follow in the papers, this obviously fuels algae growth in our inland lakes and waterways. And so one of the things that agriculture is going to be asked to do in the very near future, and we're working on legislation right now at the state level here, is prohibiting livestock farmers from spreading nutrients on, really not just livestock, but both commercial fertilizer and livestock farmers from spreading fertilizer and manure nutrients on frozen and snow-covered ground. And so one of the major challenges that farmers have, though, and especially if you're a livestock producer in the winter months, when you're going to be prohibited from spreading manure on your fields, is what do you do with it? There's a couple of options. You can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars really to build your own storage capacity and wait for spring to be able to spread that. Or another, I think interesting path here is anaerobic digesters, because anaerobic digesters can use the waste from livestock facilities in their reactors. And the really interesting part about it is it doesn't mean we're giving up those nutrients. So farmers can send their manure to an anaerobic digester during winter months when they can't spread on frozen and snow-covered ground. But the byproduct from anaerobic digestion is still nutrient rich. And you can use that byproduct then to spread on the fields when it's available to do that in the spring and summer months. So really interesting concept here. We have 12 operational digesters in Ohio right now, so that's not a lot, but there could be some potential for growth there in the future as we work to tie this in with how we tackle water quality in Ohio. Wind and solar obviously have great benefits. Farmers care, and was mentioned earlier, the benefit in terms of the local community in rural Ohio, the impact that wind and solar projects have, particularly on property, expanded property tax base that they provide. Those projects in Ohio, I understand, generate on an annual basis about $3.6 million in local property taxes. And then, of course, from a landowner perspective, lease payments that are generated from siting wind projects generate over $3 million in Ohio. And so from a farmer's perspective, there's economic opportunity there. But by far the largest on-farm renewable generation occurs through solar and the installation of solar panels. So I'll wrap up by just talking real quickly about agriculture as an energy consumer. I'll highlight AEP's EE and PDR program because they've worked really closely with Farm Bureau and farms across the state to increase energy efficiency on farms and from a number of our operations on farms. So a huge benefit there in terms of energy efficiency programs. We probably wouldn't have those opportunities without the state policy being what it is. So.
Thanks, Brandon. Good evening, everybody. My name is Richard Hicks. I'm the Director for the Office of Environmental Protection and Sustainability at the Columbus Public Health Department. Like others, I want to say thanks for the opportunity to come out tonight and offer some remarks about how clean energy can improve the quality of life for Ohioans. I guess I'd like to start my remarks by suggesting that clean energy, at least in the context of how I'll start talking about it, is an environmental issue for me and the work I do. So I'll start at square one, and that is the fact that in terms of health, there's a connection between the quality of our environment and the health of people. Environmental issues are traditionally seen as things that impact animals, plants, and our natural systems, but environmental problems can also impact human health in a number of ways. Certainly it can increase our risk of injury, they can increase sickness, cause sickness, they can create or exacerbate existing chronic health conditions. And most unfortunately, environmental problems can lead to premature death. In the past, health isn't really at the table when we're talking about things like that. And that's one reason that I'm happy and that I appreciate being here tonight. Clean energy and the use of more renewable resources can obviously help conserve natural resources. And I recognize that there are legitimate questions about the costs and the benefits of moving to more clean energy sources. But I believe that all the benefits, specifically the health benefits of using cleaner and more sustainable energy sources, have to be considered as we look at environmental issues. So with that point down, I think I'll move now a little bit more in the direction of clean energy in the context of air quality, which again is another environmental issue. And specifically to the point that poor air quality, specifically poor outdoor air, can harm our health. Outdoor air pollution can harm our bodies at unhealthy levels. This could be from anything like temporary irritation to our eyes, our nose, our throats, our circulatory system, all the way up to permanent damage if pollution levels are high enough, if exposure periods are long enough, or if there are people that are unusually sensitive to pollution and pollutants in the air. The main pollutants, I'm sure everybody knows, ozone, particulate matter, carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, lead. Those are the 5 largest pollutants in the U.S., the 5 most common pollutants in the U.S., and the ones regulated by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And these pollutants come from 2 main sources. The first is transportation, basically tailpipe pollution from mobile sources like cars and trucks. The second would be manufacturing, and we're talking here about fixed sources like factories, treatment plants, and electric power plants. How can poor outdoor air hurt our health? Well, in a number of ways. It's a contributor first to heart disease, which is the second leading cause of death in Franklin County. Air pollution is also a contributor to chronic lower respiratory disease, which is a collection of 3 basic conditions: asthma, bronchitis, and emphysema. CLRD is the number 3 leading cause of death in Franklin County. It's a contributor to stroke, which is the number 5 leading cause of death. And finally, poor outdoor air is a contributor to lung cancer. Now, if we just move to talking about asthma, it's well documented, of course, that air pollution can trigger asthma attacks and make symptoms worse. And there are now studies, too, that suggest that air pollution can also contribute to the onset of asthma as well. So if we move a little closer now to the issue of clean energy, I'd like to maybe frame the next piece of my remarks about coal-fired power plants and the impact that these have on our environment and our health. I don't want to pick on coal-fired power plants, but it'll be the easiest thing. I see some people saying, yeah, go ahead. But it'll be the easiest way, I think, to illustrate a point. And the point I want to make here, the couple points I want to make come from a 2013 study that MIT did on air pollution and early death. This study looked at coal-fired power plants and found that there are big generators for particulate matter, both PM10 and PM2.5, the microscopic particles. Electric generation facilities are the largest contributing sector for PM2.5 in the U.S., in the eastern United States anyway, according to that study. The study also found that electric coal-fired plants are big contributors for carbon. That's not news, I'm sure, to most people here. Power plants, according to that study, are the largest source of human-caused CO2 emissions in the United States. They're also a big contributor to nitrogen oxides, which are a precursor to ozone formation, and they're a big contributor and emitter of sulfur dioxides, which contribute to the formation of PM2.5. The point with all this is that these pollutants can have direct human health impacts. PM2.5 is a no contributor to cardiopulmonary disease and lung cancer. The CDC estimates there are about 760,000 people every year in this country that die from these things. The MIT study says that about 52,000 of those people, of those deaths, can be directly attributed to electric power generators. If we talk about nitrogen oxides, again, major precursor to ozone formation, the CDC says about 150,000 people die every year from respiratory diseases. MIT, in their study, attributes about 1,700 of these deaths directly attributed to electric power generation. So the point is that people are actually dying from environmental conditions caused by poor air quality. If we move closer to home and we just talk about asthma, in Franklin County, 14% of adults in Franklin County have asthma. And if I've done my math right, if we extrapolate that to Columbus, if I've done my math right, that's about 87,000 adults just in Columbus that have asthma. And if we talk about kids, that's about 32,000 kids under 18. So those are the direct health impacts from poor air quality. If we talk about indirect impacts, someone earlier mentioned global warming and climate change. Well, of course, power plants are big generators of CO2, which is a major driver in climate change, and some of the impacts, including extreme weather, heavy rains, heavy snowfalls, extreme heat. People die from those annually as well. 200 to 300 people die every year from increased precipitation events. Another 300 plus die from heat stress and heat stroke annually in the United States. Obviously, heat stress and heat stroke, a big problem for people that work outside and for the most vulnerable people in our population, the very young and the very old whose bodies aren't equipped to handle these kind of stressors. Finally, if I was going to mention impacts from CO2 generation, I'd have to mention also the risk of infectious disease. As our temperature continues to warm, we'll have more habitat available for disease-carrying insects like mosquitoes and West Nile virus, about 5,600 cases of that in the United States. Lyme disease carried by ticks, 22,000 cases a year or so in the United States from that. So that gives you a little bit of an idea about the extent of the problem. I'll try to wrap up with a little more hopeful news by talking about the fact that reducing air pollution, in part by moving to clean energy technologies, can have significant public health benefits. Again, I'll turn to a study here. Harvard School of Public Health recently released a study on the co-benefits of carbon standards for existing power plants. That study basically asked the question, what would happen if the recently proposed US EPA Clean Power Plan was adopted? And that plan, as you know, would cut carbon pollution from power plants significantly, 30% from 2005 levels by the year 2030, sorry. So what did that study show? Not surprisingly, it showed that there would be significant health benefits from reducing CO2, but it also said there would be additional benefits by reducing associated emissions from particulate matter, nitrogen oxide, sulfur dioxide, and mercury. 3,500 less people, according to the study, would die every year from conditions related to particulate matter and ozone. About 1,000 less people would be hospitalized every year because there would be an avoidance of respiratory and cardiovascular problems, and about 220 less heart attacks would occur each year from complications related to particulate matter 2.5. The study looked at a lot of different scenarios, but the numbers that I just read to you assume the scenario that's most similar to the EPA's proposed clean carbon plan. And as many of you know, that talks about 4 different strategies to reduce CO2 emissions. One of those is using a higher percentage of energy from renewable sources. So the point of the Harvard study, basically reducing outdoor air pollution will have a direct positive health benefit. Now, is moving totally to clean energy the answer? Well, no, not entirely, but Harvard's work clearly suggests that reducing outdoor air pollution will have a direct positive benefit in terms of health. And if clean energy and the use of clean energy sources can play a role in reducing air pollution, we need to look at that. We need to look at ways, specific ways and impacts that clean energy can have in reducing emissions, not only from power plants, but from other sources as well. If it can play a role in reducing sickness, chronic disease, premature death, and the associated healthcare costs with all of that, we need to include this information in any discussion that we're having about energy production and use. I'm probably out of time at this point, so I'm going to cut this short and say thank you again and pass the mic on to our next speaker.
Thank you. Again, I'm Chris Allwein. I'm a utility energy attorney. Before that, I used to insulate houses in new construction, and I really don't recall ever looking that good or a job site that neat, but kudos to that guy. Thanks again for having me out here, and thank you to all the great panelists and to everyone who came tonight to hear them. Since I'm a lawyer, I'm going to talk a little bit about the law. Ohio actually has some very good policy. Some of them, this includes customer access, encouraging customer access to reasonably priced electric service, a diversity of supplies and suppliers, the implementation of distributed generation, encouraging energy efficiency for small businesses, and facilitating the state's effectiveness in a global economy. So through those policies, looking through the lens of those policies, it's very hard to understand Senate Bill 310. So I'd like to discuss a little bit about energy efficiency, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about corporate separation. It's a related issue that I think needs to be brought up here. All of these utility-scale energy efficiency programs are required to be cost-effective. That means they're supposed to save more money than they cost. And I knew at this point people might be getting a little tired, so I brought a prop. These are First Energy compact fluorescent bulbs. They are 2 of the 3.75 million that they purchased in 2009. And they proceeded to provide a good example of how not to run a compact fluorescent light bulb program. So how do customers save money? It's a process. First, they need to be made aware of the opportunities to save money. So if you live in Columbus, you know that AEP actually does a very good job of advertising their energy efficiency programs. Once customers are aware of the opportunities, they're empowered and they can take charge of their bill and they can control their usage through participating in one or more of the energy efficiency offerings from these utilities. And all 4 Ohio investor-owned utilities had great opportunities for participation in their programs. The idea here, of course, is to create a market transformation so that people don't recoil at the funny squiggly bulbs and things like that. They become part of the landscape. So what were the results? And these results have been out there for quite some time, but I'm going to repeat a couple of them. The first 5 years, the 4 investor-owned utilities themselves reported savings of $1.5 billion to customers. It was estimated that through 2020, without change, these programs would save $5.6 billion to customers at a cost of $2.8 billion. So that's about 2 to 1. You can see these programs are cost effective. Jobs, I had 25,000, but I was corrected by the last panel. We've got over 30,000 jobs in energy efficiency. And so obviously energy efficiency has had quite a positive impact for utility customers in Ohio, which begs the question again that we appear to be, as someone from the audience said earlier, moving backwards. It isn't just a freeze, it's a prelude to a repeal. And so it's interesting to me because right now at the legislature we're debating whether to unfreeze cost-effective programs that benefit Ohio electric customers. And over at the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio, and I think John mentioned this earlier, we're debating whether to force customers to pay significant subsidies to prop up aging coal plants and a nuclear plant. And so I think that the so-called freeze and these requests to prop up these plants are a symptom of a greater problem. And I think the problem is corporate separation. Ohio corporately separated its generation in 1999. And there's some good law there, too, that still exists. One is to recognize the continuing emergence of competitive markets, and the second is ensure effective competition in the provision of retail electric service by avoiding anti-competitive subsidies flowing from a non-competitive retail electric service, such as an electric distribution utility, to a competitive retail electric service, which are your deregulated generation. And so, in my opinion, corporate separation in Ohio needs work. I think that it's a shame because we've got benefits to customer versus the deregulated entities seeking a subsidy. And I think that it's a sign that, I'm sorry, hang on one second here. All right. Okay. So utilities that supported Senate Bill 310 are now asking us to prop up aging, expensive generation with EDU customers' money. And that's because if the freeze becomes permanent, then the competition is gone. And now anti-competitive subsidies, if these coal bailouts, I guess you can tell I work for the Sierra Club, are approved, basically you're going to have anti-competitive subsidies flowing from a non-competitive service to the competitive affiliate. That is exactly the opposite of the policy that I just read you. So in my opinion, we need to make sure that the bailouts are not approved. And second, the Public Utilities Commission has promised to begin investigation into corporate separation this year. And I think it's really important that we get involved in those kind of things and encourage the Commission to commence those investigations. And I think what we learn from those investigations should be taken over to the State House, and hopefully corporate separation will get the fix that it needs. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the panel, and especially to everyone out there for powering through the audio challenges that we had. I appreciate it. Another excellent panel. I think this one tied things together for us by sort of talking about connections to the community, because that's what this is all about. And we heard about some of those connections earlier in terms of jobs and economics and the transformation of our energy sector, but this was new in that it made the connection to the environment and to health and to quality of life, and that's really the most important thing, right? So we'll take a few questions. We don't have time for a lot of questions, and then we'll wrap up. Let's see. I think this gentleman here, and I think you have a hat on. You haven't asked a question yet.
Yeah, thank you. First question for Brandon. First are in the farm, and what is the official position that Farm Bureau has on land application of sewer sludge? Also, I got a question for Rick. Got the same question for you. What is, does the Columbus Public Health Department have an official position on land application of sewer sludge? And also, does the department have a position on the health impact of hydraulic fracturing?
Okay, so Farm Bureau is made up of just over 200,000 family memberships. So we have family memberships, not individual memberships in Ohio. Now, some of those are active farmer members who actually have voting rights within our organization, and then we also have associate members, individuals who have memberships that just support our organization but aren't active farmers and don't have voting rights within the organization as well. In terms of sewer sludge, we don't have a specific policy in regard to sewer sludge, but we just see nutrients as nutrients. And so our Farm Bureau's policy is we're really focused right now on what we call the 4 R's, making sure that you apply nutrients on farm fields at the right time, at the right rate, using the right source and at the right time. That's where we're really focused on, because the phosphorus that gets into the ground is phosphorus to us. It's nutrients for plants. And so I guess that's to the extent of our policy, but we don't really drill down to sewer sludge.
And I think my answer is pretty similar. We don't really have, as a department, official policies on either one of those. What we've tried to do, and I guess I'll speak primarily to the issue of fracking, we don't have regulatory authority in a lot of the issues environmentally. Air quality would certainly be one. We don't do anything about setting standards, monitoring, enforcing. And it's the same type of thing with fracking. What we've tried to do is introduce the issue to people, to provide information to the community and citizens that may not necessarily be aware of what fracking is, and to try to provide some value added so that people can go to the people that do have regulatory authority and ask good questions. And it's pretty much the same thing, I think, with the sewer sludge issue as well.
We're gonna take 2 more questions, and then unfortunately we'll have to wrap up. But I think maybe some people will still be hanging around. So if you don't get to ask your question, you can maybe track them down. I think this gentleman has not asked a question yet. Steve.
How do we regain the political momentum that we've caused here by our success? The renewable energy industry has been so successful that the old line, utilities, energy forms, now recognize us as a real threat. And while they're dinosaurs, there are T-Rex that we've backed in the corner. And with all the little mammals and wolves nipping at their heels, they're fighting for their lives. That's really the situation, to the extent that Columbus Dispatch did an article. One coal company and its employees contributed $100,000. That's just one, to the legislative leadership this past year. How do we regain the political momentum, getting our legislature to support the emerging mammals that we all are, rather than protecting the dinosaurs?
That's a great question. So I will just start out as the moderator and answer that. This is actually going to be my closing, so I'll just make it now. I think that the reality is, in the pre-10 debate and some of the other debates that we had, I can tell you for sure that the folks that are not as excited about these technologies and sustainability were at the State House, and they were talking to their members. And they were letting them know that they weren't fans necessarily of these programs and these ideas. And we also know that
Well, you know, I think our organization has been kind of uniquely positioned in this whole debate. Our policy is really one of we need all of the above, and so I think that we have tried to instill that logic in when we talk to lawmakers about how we want Ohio's energy policy to proceed in the future, because we really need a balanced approach. There is a need, you know, for baseload generation, and we're going to have to get that from sources that are immediately available to us. But we also need to think about long term and not be short-sighted about energy policy. And so Farm Bureau's tried to really you know, push the idea of this all of the above policy, that we shouldn't abandon that. You know, I would caution, and I know there's a lot of people that are very passionate in this room about renewable energy and energy efficiency, but you know, the we versus them argument and in the political environment that we have right now in Ohio is probably not a winning equation. It really is going to have to appeal to the logic of a balanced approach to get inside and get that access and make sense to who controls the legislature and state government right now.
And I think I would add that there's opportunity in exploring and developing new partnerships. I work for city government, and everything is so siloed. We, as a health department, in the work that I'm trying to do, I've never partnered with business. It would probably be very beneficial to partner with business and business interests in some of the work that I'm doing that impacts health, because there's common ground in many cases on some of these issues where business and health could partner to get to the same place. And it may be that there's opportunity in developing new partnerships, alliances, non-traditional partnerships maybe that might get us somewhere.
You know what, I'm getting the wave. I know we said we have one more question, but I actually think that's an appropriate question to end on, because it sort of wraps everything together about our mission and what we need to do next. So I just want to thank our great third panel. Give a round of applause.
I think, you know, what's next? We've all had this great discussion, and I don't want us to leave here without with thinking that there's nothing, what comes next? Well, one of the things is, and it has been said here several times, talk to your legislators. Talk to them when they're in their district, when they have their Saturday morning breakfast meetings at the local coffee shop. You don't have to come down to State House Square. In fact, sometimes it's much more effective if you do talk to them when they're at home. Write letters, stay engaged, vote. That was a great, make that a priority when you're assessing which candidate you will support. We will also be putting a pledge, a statement of support on the tour website and asking people to sign on just to say, I support clean and renewable energy and energy efficiency as an essential part of Ohio's energy future. That'll be coming. You'll be getting an email about that. We will also put a link to the report that was discussed earlier on our website. I know he gave you the address for the association, but we'll add that to the tour website, and we will keep in touch with you, and we hope you will keep in touch with us. And remember, there are comment cards. If you didn't get a chance to ask your question or make your comment, we would still love to hear from you. So thank you again for joining us.